Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute. I didn't bring the excellent presentation. I just have the one I have today.
Oh.
So welcome, everybody. And hopefully the internet will stay up and we'll be able to get through the class. Anyway, today I have a lot of videos to show. So I want to kind of just give a brief introduction to kind of set the stage for it, and it highlights an issue that has been with America from its very beginning. What is the meaning of democracy? Is it to have a government that serves the mass of the population, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and not to serve the small population of aristocrats? Or is it there to create an environment that is favorable to the aristocrats, where the benefits of that will trickle down to the broad population? It's important to recognize the Constitution was written for property rights. And it was really only white male property owners who were allowed to vote. So you kind of see the leaning there is towards creating a government that is serving the aristocracy. The Electoral College was created so that that they could decide that the voters had it wrong and they wanted to shift it to somebody else, that the voters could have it wrong. So, I mean, what you saw go on January 6th is not without some constitutional foundation to it. And that's been an ongoing battle in America. Government has represented land barons, the tobacco, rice, and sugar producers, the cotton industry, industrial polluters. They favored management over labor. They favored oil. So, and of course, there have been periods where that has been reversed. And it's just important to see that that is an ongoing battle within the American Republic. What have been the results? Well, the land barons transformed the environment. Tobacco, rice, sugar producers, they used brutal slave operations. The cotton became the epitome of immoral management and inhuman slavery. And as I say, on steroids, it takes it to a whole new level. The impact of cotton and the brutality of slave management go hand in hand, and it introduces a much more brutal existence. And we've had industrial polluters creating toxic air, toxic water, favoring management over labor under an umbrella of populism. Populism to be something, an idea that is to serve the broad population, but it gets contravened into being a mechanism for, again, enhancing the power of the aristocrats. Oil has given us war, pollution, global warming. Again, all of these things that are not based on the public interest, the common good, but on those who are a part of the aristocracy. And we have these issues, major issues that for government to resolve, but the government has also been compromised so that it becomes a voice for blocking action against environmental degradation, lung cancer, slavery, cancer-causing pollution, global warming, equitable distribution of wealth. All of that, the government that is supposed to be acting for the common good, or if you believe that way, is not able to act that way. And you may see that government is serving more to represent the aristocracy. Problem is that many people have been educated in the Walt Disney version of American history, and they have these notions that it is a government of, by, and for the people, and freedom and justice and all of that. And so we come to the post-World War II period and the baby boom. At the end of the war, there's a tremendous expansion of people under the age of 25. And by the 1960s, half the population of the country is under the age of 25, an unusual phenomenon. And this youth generation is infused with thoughts of freedom and justice, and they become determined, demanding that America live up to the advertised product. Also, this population is being forced into colleges because the economy can't absorb all of them. And so what happens is college enrollments skyrocket. When college enrollments skyrocket, there's then a demand for professors. And what used to be a very closed system where professors had to toe a line, they had to agree to the Walt Disney version of American history. Now they need more professors, and this infusion of professors, of people who are real historians, unleashes a revolution in the world of history and starts to change the narrative. And they're teaching people in their classrooms what their research is showing. And that is inflaming them as they say, wait a minute, I want a place that really believes in freedom and justice. What becomes a center of attention is the civil rights movement. And let's take a look at that as a phenomenon of the post-World War II baby boom.
While the white counterculture celebrated the summer of love, African Americans were undergoing a transformation of their own.
Over a period of less than a year, you had people who were calm, respectable, responsible Negroes, all of a sudden militants wearing dashikis with huge afros, taking Swahili class, identifying with the homeland. There is nothing more exhilarating or seductive than a change in consciousness. And in the 1960s, blacks made a transition, especially on the college campus, from being Negroes to being black to being Afro-Americans. When they said, I'm black and I'm proud, that meant something.
Across the bay from San Francisco in Oakland, California, the Black Panther Party burst on the scene. Founded by Bobby Seale, a street-smart community organizer, and Huey Newton, a charismatic young law student, angry with the police. Ironically, Newton's law school instructor was Ed Meese, later a close advisor and Attorney General for President Ronald Reagan.
Huey Newton, before he started the Black Panthers, was a student of mine. And he was taking these courses he later wrote in his book so he would know what he called pigs knew. And so he took my course. In the middle of the course, one day he asked if he could ride to the courthouse with me. And so I said, sure. I thought maybe he'd been so inspired by my teaching that he would want to see some court trials. Well, it turned out actually he was on trial. He had stabbed someone with a steak knife at a barbecue some months before. Well, he was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon, sentenced to probation and a year in the county jail. A year later, he came back to my class, and the other classes he was taking finished, got an A, and it was after that he formed the Black Panthers.
We are a new organization. We're observing these police who've been brutalizing our people in the community, and we're a political organization. We're going to try to unify the people, and we know the law.
They provided surveillance on police officers because Oakland at that time had one of the most racist police forces in the country. While we had an advancing, developing, expanding black middle class, we also had a declining, eroding, expanding black underclass and lower class. The Black Panther Party was one of the few organizations that attempted to organize and advance the interest of that particular population.
The Black Panthers were one manifestation of Black America's growing frustration. Black communities in other cities simply exploded in rage. Beginning with Watts in 1965, black neighborhoods erupted with pent-up fury. On July 11th, 1967, Newark, New Jersey burst into flame. The next week, it was Detroit, where by the end of the third day, 100 blocks of the Motor City were engulfed in chaos and destruction. Finally, President Johnson sent in nearly 5,000 federal troops, but with orders that they carry unloaded weapons. Still, when the Detroit riots ended, there were 43 dead, 33 of them African Americans.
The Kerner Commission report was, in my view, the most accurate, high-level public document on the problems of the inner cities that had been put in the public domain. Hoover was trying to convince Johnson that these riots were a communist plot. And so they had expected that these high-level people would find communists. Instead, they found racism, and they found a whole variety of American institutions implicated in it.
The Kerner Commission stated that white society created, maintained, and condoned the black ghetto. It recommended a massive, sustained national commitment to ending discrimination. But the war in Vietnam would soon overshadow the war on poverty. The nation's attention had shifted to a tiny country called Vietnam.
And while that's taking place, Lyndon Johnson is being reactive to the events that are going on in the civil rights movement, and he decides he's going to take action to try to address some of the issues.
Quality. Farmer had never spoken to a president.
The phone rang, and a southern female voice said, Mr. Farmer? I said, yes. Mr. James Farmer? I said, yes. I said, hold the line for the president. Well, naturally, I started to say, President of what? And Lyndon Johnson's voice came on the telephone. He said, Mr. Farmer, now we are going to have to pick up the ball and
not move with that ball, and let's go and go right on through to that goal line, and then not ever. We might get run out of bounds time or two, but keep coming. And
I went down to see him in Washington. And come right in, Mr. Farmer. Sit down in that big chair. That's a Texas-sized chair. And as he was jerking my arm out of the socket, his phone rang. And he answered it. It was some senator returning his call. And he was twisting this caller's arm, trying to get him to commit himself to vote for the Civil Rights Bill.
Now, you're either for civil rights or you're not. You're either the party of Lincoln or you ain't. And this by God put up or shut up. And we've been talking about this for 100 years. Looks like it's about time to stop talking. Now, I just think that we're going to have them out in the streets again if we don't make some little progress.
He was doing all that he could, and all the while he was throwing a glance at me to make sure that I was listening. Now, when he finished those conversations, I asked him, "Mr. President, how did you get to be that way? What happened?" I said, "I know that your background on civil rights has not been very good. In fact, it's been bad." He said, "Well, Mr. Farmer, that's a good question, a fair question. And I will answer it by quoting a friend of yours, and you will immediately recognize the quote. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last."
A quotation of
So LBJ responds with a quotation from Martin Luther King. And there's a lot of debate about what was LBJ actually up to, because it isn't clear as to what his objectives were. Because he had a let me just get this next thing queued up properly.
Yet the state officials do and who seek to maintain purely local control.
And so LBJ has had a record of being a member of the Dixiecrats. He was opposed to civil rights legislation through the years, and so he was recognized as one of the Southern Democrats who represented the racist wing of the Democratic Party. But now he is president, and he is saying, now I can do what I really want to do. And that presumably was to see if I have, let me get the right one up here, where he is going to now advance civil rights for Black people. And as the cities are having uprisings against what's happening, and there's a lot of police action, like the Kerner Commission referenced, the House and the Senate asked Johnson to come and speak to them at a joint session of both houses. And so it's over a weekend. Johnson puts together his speech, and it's one of the truly remarkable speeches of his lifetime. Let's see if I can get this. Something went out on me here. Let me stop that and come back to this. Come on now. Sometimes these things don't want to cooperate. I'll try it here. Here. Okay.
Extend the rights of citizenship, citizen of this land.
Good golly.
There is no constitution.
Sorry.
The command of the Constitution is plain. There is no moral issue. Wrong. It's wrong to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country. There is no issue of states' rights or national rights. There is only the struggle for human rights. I have not the slightest doubt what will be your answer. But the last time a president sent a civil rights bill to the Congress, it contained a provision to protect voting rights in federal elections. That civil rights bill was passed after 8 long months of debate. And when that bill came to my desk from the Congress for my signature, the heart of the voting provision had been eliminated. This time, on this issue, there must be no delay or no hesitation or no compromise with our purpose. We cannot, we must not refuse to protect the right of every American to vote in every election that he may desire to participate in. And we ought not, and we cannot, and we must not wait another 8 months before we get a bill. We have already waited 100 years and more, and the time for waiting is gone. So I ask you to join me in working long hours, nights, and weekends if necessary, to pass this bill. And I don't make that request lightly. Far from the window where I sit with the problems of our country, I recognize that from outside this chamber is the outraged conscience of a nation, the grave concern of many nations, and the harsh judgment of history on our acts. But even if we pass this bill, the battle will not be over. What happened in Selma is part of a far larger movement which reaches into every section and state of America. It is the effort of American Negroes to secure for themselves the full blessings of American life. Their cause must be our cause too. Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
And so LBJ, it is a very important speech if you ever get a chance to watch the whole thing, because we are experiencing the ramifications of that speech today, and the issues today are mirror issues from then. what happens is by breaking with the racist wing of the Democratic Party, LBJ fractured the Democratic Party, and many in the party then left to join the Republican Party. And you then see the rebranding of the Republican Party at that point in time. And it's important to recognize how those things happened. So LBJ has made a large political calculation by casting his agency with the civil rights movement. At the same time, though, he has another problem that's taking place, and that is the war in Vietnam. What does he do about the war in Vietnam? And it is a perplexing and vexing problem for a president. I contend that LBJ feels boxed in where he must continue and win the war in Vietnam so he can hold off the right wing from blocking his actions in civil rights. That is just a theory, but it's something that I think is worth considering. Let's listen to a conversation between Lyndon Johnson and Richard Russell from Georgia.
Pretty good, how are you, Mr. President? Oh, I'm got lots of trouble. I want to see what we all have those. What do you think about this Vietnam thing? What I'd like to hear you talk a little bit.
Frankly, Mr. President, if you were to tell me that I was authorized to settle it as I saw fit, I would respectfully decline to undertake it. It's the damn worst mess I ever saw, and I don't like to brag. I never have been right any time in my life, but I knew we were going to get in this sort of mess when we went in there, and I don't see how we're going to ever get out without fighting a major war with the Chinese and all of them down there in those rice paddies and jungles. I just don't see it. I just don't know what to do.
Well, that's the way I've been feeling for
it's deteriorating.
6 months.
Our position is deteriorating, and it looks like the more we try to do for them, the less they're willing to do for themselves. It's just a sad situation. There's no sense of responsibility there on the part of any of their leaders, apparently. It's all just through generations or even centuries, they have just thought about the individual and glorifying the individual. That's the only utilization of power, just to glorify the individual, not to save the state or to help other people. And they just can't shed themselves of that complex. It's a hell of a situation. It's a mess, and it's going to get worse. And I don't know what to do. If I don't think the American people were quite ready for us to send our troops in there to do the fighting. And if it came down to an option of just sending Americans in there to do the fighting, which will, of course, eventuate into a ground war and a conventional war with China, and we do them a favor every time we kill a coolie, whereas one of our people got killed, it'd be a loss to us. If it got down to that, or just pulling out, I'd get out. But then I don't know. There's undoubtedly some middle ground somewhere. If I was going to get out, I'd get the same try to get rid of old Dean to get rid of these people and get some fella in there that said he wished the hell we would get out. That'd give us a good excuse for getting out. I see no terminal date for any part of that in there.
How important is it to us?
It isn't important a damn bit, but all this new...
Well, I guess it's important to us, isn't it,
from a psychological standpoint.
I mean, yes, and from the standpoint that we are party to a treaty, and if we don't pay attention to this treaty, well, I don't guess they think we're paying attention to any of them.
Yeah, but we're the only one paying any attention to it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
You see, other people just as
That's
much
right.
about that treaty.
That's right, but just because somebody else...
I think there's some 12 or 14 other countries.
That's right.
Parties to it.
There are 14 of them, but
I don't know much about the foreign policy, but it seemed to me there were several of them that were,
yeah, they're 14.
were parties to it, and other than question of our word and saving face, that's the reason I said that I don't think that anybody would expect us to stay in there. There's some old freebooter down in there that I've forgotten his name. I haven't heard about him lately, but he's still there. Sort of a hellraiser, and you don't know exactly what he wants, I think, but he's
So LBJ is faced with Vietnam. He's talking to Richard Russell. What is this important to us? Ain't worth a damn thing, says Richard Russell. So why is LBJ staying involved in the war in Vietnam? My guess is, again, is to hold off political opposition who are in support of fighting the communists. And because if they acted against him, he would not be able to proceed with what he wants to do with civil rights. Let me just get this next one here. And Martin Luther King comes out against the war in Vietnam. Get this correctly here. And when he first comes out against the war in Vietnam, he's pretty quickly shot down and told, don't do that. And so King backs off of Vietnam. But as the war progresses and he is traveling, a couple of years later, he stops and he buys at a newsstand and he buys a copy of Ramparts, which has a photo exhibit in the magazine about what's going on in Vietnam. And he is so distraught about it, he decides he needs to speak out against the injustice of the war in Vietnam, which he equates to the injustices that are perpetrated against people of color. He does so, though, without discussing it with LBJ first. And mind you, since LBJ has spent a lot of political capital on the civil rights movement, he looks at it as a betrayal.
When Martin Luther King Jr. first speaks out publicly against the Vietnam War in August 1965, he quite quickly is forced back into line by hostile criticism directed at him by Democratic allies of President Johnson.
We will not be forced out of South Vietnam.
And so King then remains silent about Vietnam for almost 18 months.
During our tour in the Republic of Vietnam, we have all seen what communism can do to a struggling nation in our world community.
When King is on his way to Jamaica in early 1967, and while waiting for a flight, he buys some magazines in an airport gift shop. And in an issue of Ramparts magazine, he sees a whole series of photos about the impact of U.S. Air Force napalm bombing on Vietnamese civilians.
Nonviolence for King was not simply a civil rights protest tactic. King believed that nonviolence was a Christian ethic that should be applied around the world, not just by black demonstrators.
Let us pray.
Only in early 1967 does King's conscience begin to so trouble him about his prolonged silence that he forces himself to go public once again knowing full well that in doing so, it will break his political alliance with Lyndon Johnson and bring down very widespread political criticism on his head.
And of course, it's always good to come back to Riverside.
The worst press that Martin Luther King received, I think, in his lifetime was exactly 1 year before his assassination.
I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam.
He reminded President Johnson he could count. How was there going to be any money for the war on poverty when all the money that was being set aside for the war on poverty was being spent to build bombs?
You know, America is a rich nation. The richest nation on the face of the earth. Now, you know what's wrong? Our national priorities are mixed up. And I'm afraid the national administration of our country is more concerned about winning the war in Vietnam than winning the war against poverty right here in the United States.
He was attacked from coast to coast, simply from describing the world as it really is. And this was not the racist Southern press. This was the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times. And, you know, I mean, everybody blasted him for having an opinion.
King went to communist training school, and I don't want anything to do with communists.
Are you sure of this?
Look right here.
Is that your only proof?
We have proof, and we are satisfied that it's true proof.
When he publicly spoke out against the war that persons he had known and been close to, for years turned against him.
And we don't see any reason for downgrading civil rights and elevating the peace movement above it, especially the indignities our people are suffering. The main show for us is right here, civil rights.
Yeah, he was hurt and depressed, and he, you know, the pressure of the home and his marriage and so forth. You know, it was getting to him.
It wasn't that he was right or wrong. He didn't have any business having an opinion. See? He realized how sick this country was. And he felt that he couldn't slow down, and he had to push on regardless.
I weighed the criticisms that I would get. Yes. I thought about even the fact that some Negroes wouldn't understand, and some respectable Negro leaders who were more concerned about being invited to the White House than invited to the cause of justice would be against it.
In the wake of Dr. King's Riverside Church speech, Lyndon Johnson's White House very explicitly identifies King as a major threat to the president's policies.
I'm convinced that it will lead to widespread discontent and disenchantment with the administration if there isn't a change in the policy and an all-out effort to de-escalate the war and bring an end to it.
Now, Lyndon Johnson's White House had always been privy to the FBI's sexual surveillances of Dr. King. But now, Lyndon Johnson comes to view Martin Luther King as an enemy. And the FBI is eager to strengthen its own relationship with President Johnson by jumping on this anti-King bandwagon with greater fervor.
I just got word that Martin Luther King will give a press conference at 11 o'clock this morning in Atlanta. King was told by Levinson, who is his principal advisor and who is a secret communist, that he has more to gain nationally by agreeing with the violence that is coming out against it. That's the substance of information. We got that highly confidentially over the technicals. And I'll have for you tomorrow that memorandum you want on all the riots in the country.
That's right, and I want you to keep your men busy to find the central connections. But I wouldn't be a damn bit surprised that this poverty group here is not stirring up some of this.
We'll dig into that very thoroughly.
All right, okay.
Fine, thank you, Mr. President.
And so there's now daylight between Lyndon Johnson and Martin Luther King. This can be a formidable problem for Martin Luther King, and really for the whole civil rights movement, and also for LBJ. I have to wonder, and I don't know that King didn't speak with LBJ before he came out so vociferously. But my belief is that he did not, the reason being that Johnson was such a powerful persuader and really very smart in thinking on his feet and knowing how to back someone into a corner to get what he wanted. But it would have seemed to me that he could have persuaded King that the Vietnam War was a price that had to be paid if civil rights advances were to be made. And I don't know that to be the case, but I think it is something that's worth considering. Mind you, while this is going on, King is still under enormous pressure from the FBI surveillance and what's been revealed already about him.
We used to have these conference calls at least 3 times a week, late at night, 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And I was convinced then the FBI was tapping our phone. I just said, I'm sure they're doing it. Dr. King became so annoyed at me for repeatedly saying this. Clarence said, don't you know the FBI is getting more important and better things to do than to be wiretapping our phones? But there did come a day when he became more suspicious. And then there came a day certain when the FBI mailed a tape of Dr. King with other women, mailed it to him and to Coretta with an advice that he should go kill himself. That's when he knew.
I think there have always been a couple of really important tensions within the FBI. One is being a very rule-bound organization, a very professional organization, an organization very attuned to jurisdiction and law, and then being an organization that was almost lawless.
The Bureau has all of these hotel room recordings. And so Sullivan has his underlings compose a greatest hits compendium tape and then sits down at his own typewriter to draft an anonymous threatening letter to King.
This is purportedly from an admirer within the movement who has found out about King's sexual indiscretions, feels betrayed by it, and writes this full-page, really scurrilous letter denouncing King as a beast and a pervert and a monster, a hypocrite, and in fact saying, I know what you've done.
It's clearly a very poor quality attempt of someone who's sort of culturally clueless to pass as black.
They put this package together and send it off, saying, King, you know what you have to do, and giving him a deadline by which he needs to do it. Many people have interpreted that to be that you need to kill yourself, and this is one of the ways that King and his confidants who saw this letter interpreted it. There's some ambiguity there, but it is one of the most notorious kind of dirty tricks that the FBI ever conducted in the 1960s.
Have you read that letter?
Yes, I have. Sick to my stomach, actually. I mean, I didn't throw up, but I felt ill reading it. And that's what I mean when I say I think this entire episode represents the darkest part of the Bureau's history.
The package was sent to the office. I think it was mailed to us from somewhere in Florida. We never saw it. It was put in a box and sent to Coretta. So she opened it up and she played it. And then she called the office and said, look, somebody has sent a tape in here trying to get Martin to kill himself. And they have a recording of some man and woman in the bed. I didn't even want to hear it, you know. This was designed to upset him. We always assumed that Hoover was behind it. My philosophy about the movement is that unless I saw something with my own eyes, you really have to be careful what you believe.
We get this video ready. It should be okay. Just take a second to get this up, I hope. But it's not, oh, there it is.
Several thousand Negro demonstrators participating in
That's WNBS headline news at 8:25 Nick Weekend.
Get here. The impact also has a huge impact on Lyndon Johnson. Sorry. So what happened there? Two little things happening. Sorry, got the wrong video up there. Let me get this back. Video.
Washington.
U.S. authorities have revealed a shortage of bombs in South Vietnam is curtailing air attacks on the Viet Cong.
The president has frequently interrupted his day-long conference on Vietnam problems to stay in close touch with the volatile racial disorders throughout the nation.
Bombs in Vietnam exploded home. They destroyed the dream and possibility for a decent America.
Let us close the springs of racial poison and make our nation whole.
The most massive series of demonstrations ever attempted is the promise of Dr. Martin Luther King, leader of a planned April civil disobedience drive in Washington.
I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
I will die standing up for the freedom of my people.
This has been Headline News from Radio Memphis, WMPS.
WMPS.
And so Lyndon Johnson decided not to seek re-election, and world was in great disarray by 1968. And we'll follow up with that next week. Okay, now we can open for discussions.
Please use the raise your hand function if you have a question. And you may want to switch to your view to the gallery view. Or stay with the speaker view, actually. We do not see you.
Yeah.
So
You don't see me?
don't see you. And
That's because I flipped my PowerPoint paper over the camera. See, I can become invisible. It's one of the unique tricks that I have. I just disappear.
Sort of like LBJ.
Yeah, right.
Madeline has a question or comment.
I just wanted to comment a little bit on what a powerful person Richard Russell was back then.
Madeline, you're coming in and out.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on what an important person Richard Russell was back then. He was the leader of the group preventing civil rights legislation. He used the filibuster over and over to stop it. As you may know, our federal building in downtown Atlanta is still named the Richard B. Russell Building. And I believe there is an office building in DC also named the Richard B. Russell. So he was a senator for a really long time, and he was very powerful. He was also, Sal, on the Warren Commission.
Yes. Yes.
That's kind of bizarre, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of comment on that. And so, I mean, that's why Johnson was talking to him, was because of how powerful he was, not some other senator. And as a college student who was involved in the anti-war movement, I wrote a letter to Senator Richard Russell asking him to help end the Vietnam War. He actually did send me a response and say he was working on it. So anyway.
Fascinating. And yeah, you're right. He was on the Warren Commission, and he wanted to write a separate report because he didn't agree with the Warren Commission. And LBJ twisted his arm to just go along with it. Richard Russell played a huge role in LBJ's career. LBJ looked at him as his mentor, and Russell really had a lot of affection for Lyndon. When Lyndon was going to break with the Southern Democrats and was going to fight for civil rights legislation and the voting rights bill, he spoke with Richard Russell, and you can hear it on the tapes if you ever go and listen, have a chance to go and listen to them. And Lyndon says to Russell, he says, I want you to understand, I don't expect your support on this legislation. But I want you to know that if you try to block it, I will roll over you.
I guess that was the end of that friendship, huh?
Well, no, I mean, they had very candid conversations with each other, and there's going to be, you know, splits and mind you, when LBJ knew he was going to shatter the Democratic Party for the next 100 years because of his coming out in favor of civil rights. And, you know, it was kind of, it's time we need to rebrand. Mind you, up until that time, the Black vote was very much a Republican vote. And so, you know, it all changes over after that. And it's what I find interesting is when you look at contemporary politics, I've seen multiple opportunities for the parties to rebrand. And, you know, if you look at the post-mortem Republican report after Romney lost, I think it has a lot of very fruitful information in there, and there were opportunities for them to take that direction. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say was that many of King's own advisors did not want him coming out against the war because they thought it was going to hurt the civil rights stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it was
not want him to.
And Ralph's got a comment too. I can get to Ralph.
Yeah, hey, a couple of things. First, that remark about by President Johnson, you know, that's a fact. That's not a story. One of his aides put that in a book. Johnson said in so many words, you know, somebody said to Johnson right there with all these people around, you know, you've done it, Mr. President, or something like that. And Johnson said in so many words, I have just delivered the South to the Republican Party for the next 100 years. Johnson saw that coming. He saw the Southern strategy. He knew the Republicans would welcome those people, and he did it anyway. But the other thing I wanted to mention was CNN ran a series not long ago called LBJ. And I don't know if any of you watched it, but it was really well done. If they run it again, you want to watch it. The man is just an interesting, you know, person from a lot of different standpoints. I was listening to your commentary early about Johnson, Sal. The CNN folks painted Johnson as more sympathetic to civil rights, and they did so based on his experiences working around Hispanics and Hispanic kids in Texas and seeing how they were treated. It's hard to know what to make of that, isn't it? I mean, the man came to where he came, but there's, like you say, there's a lot of questions about what the deal really was in Lyndon Johnson's head. But they had enough historical background for that to make a pretty interesting case that he had seen injustice close up.
No, there's no doubt about that. Before he became a politician, he was a school teacher.
Right.
He would stay after class to help the cleaning people learn English as a second language. Right.
That was part of the show. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so, you know, with any of these figures, they're more complicated than we might see on the news, and that there's multi-dimensions to them, and they change with time.
What did
you think in 1940? What did you think in 1950? I mean, those can be very, listen, I mean, I look at myself and you know, do my views of today reflect what I thought when I was 18? Totally different. So yeah, no, I think Johnson is a fascinating character, and you can paint him many different ways. I think it's important to try to get into more depth about him. My belief was that he genuinely wanted to get his name in the history books.
Right. And the fact that it was, and he was writing the right thing to do at the right time, and he knew it. I mean, look at those standing ovations he got in front of Congress.
So what was his motivation for civil rights, or was the motivation more egotistical to say, this is something that I'll have a place in history? Yeah.
Right. Which he largely has, you might add. I mean, he stands pretty tall with me because of what he did, but what he was thinking will always be something of a mystery. One other thing too, when you played that clip with Congress, it was astonishing to look out there and see all the white men in suits that were nearly identical, even with it being black and white. Come on, you know, that was pretty much an identical scene. I couldn't find a single woman in the entire chamber.
Right.
It was almost shocking.
Yeah. Sal, could you possibly bring in, there were two acts, 57 and 58. I think there was some legislation passed in Congress, and LBJ was the Senate Majority Leader. Could you sort of like explain a little bit about that and LBJ's role?
Oh, yeah, no, it was there was a civil rights bill that was passed, and but I don't know enough about what LBJ did with it, so I can't. Yeah.
Joy?
Yeah, it seems to me that today's Republicans are very similar, if not identical, to the Dixiecrats. Why hasn't anybody said that specifically? Are there that many differences? Because Dixiecrats did not have a good view, or weren't viewed positively even by Northern Republicans.
No, it was, yeah, I mean, that's what you had was why is it not talked about that much? Well, when you look at a news report, news reporters are reporting on what's happening in the moment. They don't have an extensive historical background. And so you don't get the context that is very important. The bigger issue for America is race.
Yeah, it always has been.
It always has been. And so, we're talking about inflation. We're talking about crime, and, all of this is nonsense.
Right.
There are people, mind you, the anti-abortion political movement is really something that was designed as a disguise for the racial motivation. And it was the people who put it together knew what they were doing. When Roe v. Wade took place, there was debates about abortion, but post-World War II, Europe was no abortions. Post-World War II, women in Europe said, there's going to be abortion. It changes everywhere, rapidly, quickly, right? Mm-hmm. So abortion laws crumble at the end of World War II. Part of it was women who had been raped by the enemy didn't want to carry the baby to term. Women who were just struggling to feed the kids they had at that moment couldn't afford to have another kid. So it was, even in Rome, the abortion laws get removed. So when it comes to America and they pass the abortion, it's a 7-2 decision with Republicans writing the decision. It wasn't that controversial. It became controversial when political operatives said, we need to drive wedges, we can gin up this thing and it will become a factor. And it will also, what we'll do is at the same time, we'll make it partially racial, and that becomes, so people don't come out as being racist, they come out as being pro-life.
Gotcha. Pro-white life, obviously.
No, right, but that's so. I mean, so when you're looking at what we get on the news today, it's mostly stuff that was generated by political operatives to define the debate of the day, and the reporters are simply responding to that.
Thanks.
Dave, you're muted.
Other than me to unmute, including me to unmute, and give Sal a warm
Wait, we got one more. We got another question here from Howard. Tim,
Yeah, I object to the use of the term pro-lifers. They're not pro-life. They're pro-birthers. They don't give a crap what happens after that kid comes out. They won't feed it. They won't feed the mother. They won't provide it care. They're birthers. They're not lifers. They're birthers. And start using that term. And by the way, when the Supreme Court overthrew Roe versus Wade, for a minority of Americans who had that pro-birthers based on religious beliefs, imposed, that most Americans don't realize, Christian Sharia law on the rest of the United States, imposing a religious belief on the majority of Americans, whether they believe that or not. And we need to start calling it what it is. They're pro-birthers, and it's Christian Sharia law.
And compare that to the high rate of maternal mortality and who gets killed, who dies the most.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And if they think they're going to stop abortions, they're not. They're going to increase maternal mortality.
Yeah.
Before we close out, though, I still have my poem for you.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Good, go.
I held it to the end so people who don't want to hear my poetry can drop it out. Anyway, I think these are really good. Title of the poem is 1963, May 28. You sit at a greasy counter, feet touching the sticky floor. People crowd you, pour coffee in your hair, burn cigarettes on your skin, dump sugar, ketchup, mustard down your shirt. You stare past them through watery eyes, thinking, we shall overcome one day. Hell might as well flay our skin, peel back each layer, sheet by sheet. See for yourselves, we're just like you.
Thank you, Sal.
Thanks, Sal.
And let's give a warm applause for Sal, Poet Laureate.
Okay, everybody. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
All right.